Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Dezi, and you're in the place to be if you love all things magical, mystical, and mysterious. Today's video topic is one of my most favorite things to talk about, and that is the legends behind the mermaid. And I know when I was growing up as a kid, I always used to pretend I was a mermaid. It was impossible to get me out of the water, and I just loved being around the water. I felt peaceful and at home in it, and I always was fascinated by these creatures that possibly could be swimming below the depths of freshwater lakes and oceans and possibly rivers. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now I just want to preface this video with saying I don't speak any of these languages. I only speak English, and I am probably going to say them wrong. I will try to put the text up here. If not, I will try to look up the pronunciation and play it on my phone, just because a lot of these are in different languages and I just know I'm going to mess it up. So don't come for me in the comments because we just know it's going to happen. Asian cultures regard the mermaid as a creature of wonder. In Chinese folklore, they regard the mermaid to actually cry tears that could change into pearls. They could also knit a very valuable material that was white as frost and was unable to become wet. So it was extremely valuable, and people would actually go out and hunt and try to fish for these mermaids to bring them back so they could profit from them. However, any man who went out to farm for these creatures were looked upon negatively because these creatures were epitomized for grace and beauty, and the people did not want these creatures to be harmed or to be disturbed. In some legends, they were said to sound like a crying baby with the noises that they would make. In some folklore, they are said to have 4 feet and cried like a human child. Some said that they have tails and some don't. So I'm going to lump together nymphs and sprites, mermaids, and serpents kind of all together. They're all very much a water spirit as a mermaid, because in different cultures they all kind of melt into each other very much, and in one culture it could be a mermaid, in another one the same creature could be spoken of as a nymph or a sprite or something. So I'm just going to refer to them as a mermaid. Now, the very first known and recorded instance of a sighting of seeing a mermaid comes from an ancient civilization that was known as Assyria, and is actually the location of what is known as northern Iraq right now. This sighting dates back to 1000 BC. It states that the mermaid was actually a goddess named Aragatis. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I tried looking up the pronunciation. I couldn't find it, so I am just phonetically throwing it together here. The story tells that she fell in love with a human shepherd, but ends up killing him accidentally. The goddess was ashamed, so she threw herself into a lake. Thus, she assumed the tail of a fish and the upper body of a human woman, and became the very first mermaid. So the tale goes that she was so powerful. She was like banging hot, right? She was the most beautiful creature in existence, and when she threw herself into the lake to sacrifice herself and die, she became a mermaid because whoever is in charge of that has decided she was too beautiful from the upper half, from the head to the waist, that we couldn't destroy that by turning her into a fish. So she became the very first mermaid. Now, back then, the only way that a god or a goddess could die is because they are immortal, is to throw themselves into a body of water, like the lake that she had thrown herself into. In ancient Greek tales, the sister of Alexander the Great was turned into a mermaid upon her death. and somehow her spirit ended up in the Aegean Sea. When a ship came upon this mermaid, she asked the crew, "Is King Alexander well? Is he alive?" And they explained that he is indeed well, and he's actually conquering the world. This gave the mermaid such joy that she calmed the seas for the voyagers to then voyage on through safely. Now, the first country that we're going to travel to is actually Canada, because one, I am from Canada and I have family ties here. I am of Native American background as well as Scottish and Irish. So the first few are going to be Canada, Scotland, and Ireland, and then we're going to travel a little bit more around the world and give you some examples from those locations. But the very first one I was excited to see, it is actually called the Ojibwe Mermaid. These are a stem of mermaids that are actually a species of mermaid that the Ojibwe tribe has recognized as a legitimate species, and actually a lot of tribes in Native American culture, they use the mermaid in some tribes on their crest of their tribe to signify that they have a relation to the mermaid, and I think it's just really cool that they use them as a symbol. Now, the very first mermaid we're going to cover from Ojibwe culture is Mermaid, and Mermaid is a small river-dwelling mermaid. It's actually the size of a child. It's super small. They were said to be very hairy and have a very narrow face. They are generally very gentle and docile creatures. Unless they are disrespected, then they can become very mischievous and can tend to push canoes off course in a way to kind of get back at people, or they tend to steal if you are disrespectful to them. It is said in some legends that Mermaid can only be seen by children or medicine people, and in others it's said that anyone can see them. It is described as being child-sized and hairy with a large head and a strange voice that sounds like the whine of a dragonfly, which I think is super weird and crazy, and I'm kind of living for it. They have narrow faces, and in some stories they state that they have no nose at all, and in some they do. So I don't really know. I couldn't really find any stories that confirmed their appearance. Some may have some nose and then some may not. And in some stories and folklore, they are said to be created from the bark of trees. They tend to carve symbols into stones, and they are known to carve little canoes for themselves fashioned out of stone. So that one was super interesting. I love hearing about mermaids from Canada. I cannot wait for this health issue to be gone with COVID so that I can get out and explore Canada a little bit more. I love BC. I want to go out there so bad. I haven't been out there since my great grandma passed, and we used to go out there to help her. There are so many lakes and rivers out there that I want to explore, not only just for mermaids but for the paranormal. There are so many things out there that are so wondrous that I love about BC and all over Canada. The very next one we're going to get into is actually stemming from Ireland. In Ireland, the mermaid is called a Merrow, and Merrows are known to be very beautiful with long, green, luscious hair. But the male Merrow is known to be extremely grotesque and cruel. So it is actually said that a lot of female Merrow tend to have relationships with human men and start families in that sense so that they can have a loving relationship, because the men Merrow are extremely cruel and evil and ugly. They're said to be more fish than man. The next location we're heading for is Scotland, of course, and the Isles of Scotland. These are the shape-shifting creatures that live in the sea and then travel up into the land to explore, and they actually take off their skin. They are known as the Selkie. The Selkie lives as a seal in the ocean. but when it wants to explore the land, it comes aboard land and peels off its skin and hides it in a safe space and is able to roam the land as a human woman. In Gaelic folklore, they were known as the Maiden of the Sea. Now, Selkies take off their skin and hide them in a very good hiding place because they do not want the humans to find them. The reason is, if humans find the skin, especially a human man, then the human man has control of the Selkie and they cannot go back to the sea. And they don't want that. They want their freedom. So they hide their skin very well. Now, if the man finds it, they can force them to marry them. And it doesn't matter how long the man has the skin hidden, that Selkie is going to be looking for its skin, no matter how many years down the line. So whether they have children or not, they find their skin, they're out of there. The next one I'm going to go over is actually from Africa. And she's yet another goddess, which I actually love the correlation between mermaids and folklore of goddess and gods, and the kind of divinity that could come from these type of tales as a spirit of water. Her name is Mami Wata, or Mother Water. She is celebrated throughout much of Africa and the African Atlantic as a representation of the sacred nature of water. Portrayed as a mermaid or a snake charmer, or as the most popular version as both a mermaid and a snake charmer together. She is known to bring great fortune. There is no singular characteristic with this goddess or god because they are actually gender fluid, so they can appear as a female or they can appear as a male. They are worshipped for their benevolence in their offerings of healing, beauty, and wisdom, and warding off natural disasters. The next mermaid I would like to go over is named Adaro, and this mermaid is from the Solomon Islands. Now, back in the day when sailors would go out and voyage, if they were gone too long, they were known to go insane, and this was blamed on Adaro. They would go insane and walk off their ship. It is said that children who disobeyed their parents would just meander off the ship without a care, like they had lost the will to live. With no fight in them, they would just jump into the water and drown with no fight, no lashback, nothing. It's almost as if something sucked out the will for them to live, and this was also blamed on the Adaro, that the Adaro would suck this from them and tempt them into the water so that they could eat them. The creature had the face and upper body of a man without hair, and it had black eyes, and it was gray and shark-like in its skin texture. It had a shark-like tail and breathed underwater through gills behind its ear. It would wait for people to fall into the water, and if a person had actually sinned a lot, they were known to suck out the rest of the good parts of that person and only leave that person with the dark side of humanity. Christians were able to adapt this and turn this more into portraying them as a fallen angel or a demonic being in their version, but in other cultures they're known as the Adaro or the mermaid. The next one we're going to go into is really awesome. It kind of reminds me of a nymph, and it's actually very sad when you think about it. The next one is called the Ruscula, and the Ruscula is a spirit of a person who lost their life in a very tragic way through drowning. Rusculas are pictured with feet rather than a fin. They either can be portrayed naked or with a very white, loose-fitting dress that almost looks like mist. They are known to come out of the water many times a year and actually water the earth that dripped off their bodies as they dance under the spring moon. They can be seen combing their hair or fascinating garlands with flowers for their hair. They sleep during the day and only come out at night, and their skin is a pale greenish color. They live in lakes and rivers as opposed to the ocean, and they tend to lure in men and children to drown them. This is probably said because they had tragic experiences either with having an unwanted pregnancy and being drowned for that, or being forcibly pushed into a marriage that was unwanted to them. So they saw no other choice than to kill themselves and drown than live a loveless marriage or an abusive marriage. They are closely correlated to the nymph, whose main purpose was to give life-giving moisture to the earth and the forest and the plants every spring as they came out of the water into the fields during the spring moon to dance in the moonlight. The next mermaid comes from Western Europe, more so in France and Germany that I could find. Mousseline was a serpent who had a fish tail and sometimes had wings. Now this is a really interesting story to me, especially because it had a fairy aspect to it, and she was part of the Fae. You know me and Fae, like, we're buddies. So let's get into the little story about it. The most famous legend was of a girl who had entombed her father into a mountain for betraying and leaving her mother, who was a fairy. Her mother was displeased and heartbroken over her deed, even though the daughter was trying to be there for the mother. Good on you, daughter. Like, that's a good daughter. I wish if I ever had a kid that my kid had my back like that. So I don't know what was wrong with this mom, but she actually cursed her daughter to, for every Saturday, she would turn into a serpent below the waist. Then there was another story that Mousseline had actually fallen in love with a human and he asked for her hand, and she agreed only based on the conditions that he would never look upon her while she was in the bath. Now I couldn't really see if it was because she also turned into a serpent when she was in water, or if she just bathed on Saturdays. It was just very unclear. But yeah, I guess he had looked upon her as creepy peeping Tom, even though he agreed not to, and she caught him and flew off and was never saw again. Now the next mermaid I want to go over is actually called Lorelei, is how I believe it's pronounced, and she stems from Germany. I wanted to go over her little story and read it to you because I thought it was super interesting. She was known to live on Rhine River on the eastern shore atop a steep rock. There once lived a nymph named Lorelei. She dressed in white and wore a wreath of stars in her hair. Now that imagery is just beautiful to me. To me, sounds like a goddess, and I can't wait to kind of research into it and see if I can find any type of correlation to a goddess with this description. She was said to be exquisite, but more than that, she had a song that she sang. A song so alluring, no one could resist its pull. People said that anyone sailing close to the rock would lose their life, for her song was so irresistible, and no sailors who tried to reach Lorelei ever returned. Now I just want to go over her little story blurb here. It's not too long. I just thought it was super interesting, and I want to know what you guys think. There was long ago one proud young warrior who lived in Palatin's court with his father. I may be pronouncing that wrong. I'll put the spelling up here. The young man's name was Ronald, and he was the light of his father's life. One day, as Ronald was boating down the Rhine with an old sea captain, he heard Lorelei's song. In that moment, he could think of nothing but her. He longed to hold her, and he felt as if invisible arms were pulling him toward her. Though anyone seeing him from afar would have seen nothing but a sailor pulling on his oars, rowing hard toward the rock. Twilight's haze shrouded the Rhine Valley as Ronald approached the rock. His boat was nearing the cliff as the sun began to set behind the mountains, and darkness fell like a curtain. And silence fell too. The only light seemed to shine from the evening star high above him. That star seemed to be an angel set in the sky to protect helpless young men. Ooh, I think that's Lorelei. It's super scary so far, actually. I am getting kind of chills. For a while, Ronald stopped rowing and gazed at the star. But then the old man sitting beside him cried, "Stop! We must turn around. You're heading towards Lorelei, the enchantress." But it was too late. Hearing that name, Ronald opened his eyes wide and saw that beautiful creature combing her copper hair. Her dress flowing in the evening breeze, it seemed to Ronald that the only light left in the world was the light surrounding her. Despite the darkness, she was composed of light, gleaming eyes, shimmering lips, her face aglow, and her song cut through him like a knife to the heart. Longing song, it called to him, "Come to me, come to me." When Lorelei looked down at him, he trembled and could not take his eyes away from her. He could think of nothing but how marvelous this moment was, and in his trance, his boat crept slowly to her and to the rocks. But the boat was moving too slowly for Ronald when she called, "Ronald! Ronald!" He dived into the water. People say they heard a scream, a death-like sound coming from the rocks as the waves washed over Ronald's body. The old boatman wept as he worked to steer the boat away from the shore. Lightning stabbed the sky, thunder rumbled over the mountain. Still the song of Lorelei filled the air. Somehow the old man made his way home, and before long the court heard the news of the young man lured by the siren to his death. Ronald's father, sick with grief, ordered his soldiers to bring the enchantress to the court, dead or alive. Off they set on their quest, and as these soldiers neared the rock, the leader looked up and cried, "Let us throw her from the rocks to the sea. Let her know the death she has caused others." At that moment, the first shade of twilight draped itself over the mountains. The armed men began to climb up the side of the mountain towards the peak. Above them, they could see the top of the mountain was veiled with mist. They thought it was the last rays from the sun, but it was the last light that wrapped Lorelei in its embrace. There she was, dreamingly combing her hair. As the men drew close, she reached inside her dress and removed a string of pearls, bound these around her head, and looked at the soldiers. "What are you doing here?" she cried. "You are mere men." The leader cried, "You are a sorceress, and we are here to destroy you." The next sound they heard was a laugh that echoed from the corner of the valley. "The Rhine is coming to me," Lorelei cried, as she bent over the precipice, tore the pearls from her head, and hurled them into the water. Then she began to sing, "Dear Father, send forth thy seeds from waters clear, and I shall ride the waves and the wind." And at that moment, a storm burst into being. The Rhine began to whirl and rise. Foam covered the banks, rising higher and higher until it reached the nymph. It lifted her into its arms and carried her down into the rushing current, and at the same time Ronald's body appeared washed ashore. The terrified men returned to the palace to tell the court the news. From near and far, people came to mourn Ronald and to gaze at the palace, to search for a glimpse of the famed sorceress. But from that day on, no one ever saw her again. Some sailors, they occasionally see her on the hills. Now and then a passing boater comes to hear her voice, soft and low, echoing from high above. And everyone who passes that rock looks up, half hoping for a sight of her, and half afraid. Ooh, that story is super spooky and mysterious and so alluring, just like Lorelei herself. I found myself pulled into that story like I was there living it myself, and I got chills through the majority of that story. What do you guys think down below? Do you think she could possibly be a goddess of some different culture and they are just disrespecting her by coming to her palace, her place of peace, and intruding on her, not bringing offering, that kind of thing? I wonder. I kind of have a bit of a theory on it that possibly she is a goddess and was for long forgotten and was disrespected and trumping upon her safe space, that maybe she just decided to leave the earthly plane and watch from above. Who knows? Maybe she is a goddess of death. We never know. Instead of blaming death on her, maybe she is giving death to people who it's their time and she's passing them over. You never know. So that was the story of Lorelei. Super creepy and spooky. I love that story. It's one of my new favorites. Anyways, guys, that is the video on mermaids, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy my videos but are not yet subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the like button down below, and don't forget to hit that little bell notification so you're not left out anytime I post a video, because I do post multiple times a week now on anything from folklore, witchcraft, the occult, cryptids, all of that stuff. So I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay witchy, guys.